Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts or an Apple Podcasts, and on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. We're starting the stage shows this week. You don't know what those are, you're going to want to find out. Check it out, $2.99 per month. Link right here in the description. Get off of Twitter. Stop talking politics. Just come talk Heat as training camp starts. This is the place to go. Again, it's Off the Floor. Link is right here in the description. Also, our fantasy partner Prize Picks. You can still use the code 5 FIVE to get started. You put down $5, they give you $50 to play. Again, Prize Picks is our daily fantasy partner because it is the easiest to play. You can play up to 4 players together across the sports, set your lineup, and that's all you got to do. So again, go to Prize Picks, use the code FIVE. And now, today's episode.
Down to Biscayne.
Yeah. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all band. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, it's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. I got Brady Hawk. You can follow me at Brady Hawk 305. Our last episode, Alex Toledo and I went through the Nasir Little signing. Want to get your thoughts on that before we get to today's topic.
Yeah, I've kind of felt like this team was a little light on wings, especially defensively. Like we talk about the point of attack stuff, but the point of attack stuff has always been covered up by their wings. So it felt like Haywood being re-signed was crucial. Jimmy is going to be kind of more on his plate defensively this year. They want to play more drop with Bam. Jaime's kind of the guy, the swing player that I think they want to see be that guy, and they want to see make that growth, and he's kind of put that on himself. So if he's able to do that, that's big. But they're like one wing going down away from like being in trouble defensively, it feels like on a lot of nights. So I like the idea of getting depth down the roster of defensive wings that Spo will play. And we don't know what it'll look like offensively. That's kind of the big issue. But ideally, Spo doesn't really utilize the guys like this to be big parts of the offense. It's just kind of playing a role defensively, and him and I guess Keyshawn Johnson will be guys that can potentially fill in and play that role. So I like the idea of just kind of getting more depth in that area because I felt like they needed it defensively.
And to be clear, this is not a two-way contract. It doesn't affect the second apron, at least not yet. They have until January 7th to make a decision on Little. It's a non-guaranteed contract until that point. So essentially it's a standard, but it's non-guaranteed. And they have until, through the first week of January. So by then, maybe there's a trade made, which clears a roster spot or clears some money up against the second apron, or maybe he just outplays somebody, and then there will be decisions to make. But to me, and I said on the last podcast, you take flyers on higher upside guys now. Like that's the idea. Now you've got Josh Christopher and Nasir Little, 2 first-round picks, former first-round picks that kind of busted out in previous spots, and you see what happens. And I think that I know they identify skill sets with these undrafted guys, and then they try to build on those. But sometimes you want to be able to move the needle a little bit more with someone, and if you can get a guy and it just clicks with Spo coaching him, then you have another asset down the road. So we'll see where that plays out. All right, what we're going to get into, though, is not Heat related today. We're going to talk about the 7 teams. And the reason we're going to talk about these 7 teams is because there seems to be a consensus. And I've never really seen it like this before. Any of my friends who are in national media, or you see former players talking, they're splitting the East into tiers. And we've done this where we've done it ourselves here on the podcast. And it seems pretty clear that there are 5 teams in the Eastern Conference that are not going to be trying to win this year. And some of this is because I guess Kevin Garnett is saying that Cooper Flagg is going to be the baddest white boy that's come into the league in a long time. I'm assuming he means American because Luke is pretty bad. But we get his point. So there is going to be sort of a race to the bottom among certain teams that don't feel that they can compete. And they're just going to be building with their young players. So to me, it's Charlotte, It's Washington, as always. They'll probably trade Kuzma at some point. We've talked about that on a prior episode. It's Brooklyn, which traded Bridges, and they're accumulating draft picks. It's Detroit, which is going a different direction with the coach now, but we'll see which young players he plays, but they're not really trying to win. And it's Toronto, which has some talent there, but it seems like Masai has finally decided, okay, let's try to rebuild the thing instead of staying in the middle. Then there are two teams in Chicago and Atlanta that probably should go that direction, but they still have too much veteran talent there for it to really happen. I guess Atlanta could be a little bit better than people expect. And Chicago loses DeRozan. They get Levine back, but they were better without Levine last year. They may still try to trade Levine. Who knows? So I kind of have them as the 9-10 play-in teams. And then there's the 7 others. And the 7 others, and we can tier them, other people have, are Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Milwaukee, Orlando, Cleveland, Indiana. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at which of these teams the Heat could potentially pick off. Like how did the Heat get out of where most people have them, which is 7 or 8, and get one of the regular playoff spots this year? Again, assuming good circumstances for the Heat, but not like great. Like assuming some injuries, but not like what we saw the last couple of seasons. Assuming Jimmy plays at a high level, but he's not a top 10 player in the regular season. Assuming they find some fits, but not all fits. In other words, things work out reasonably well for the Heat, and maybe they're a 45 to 47 win team. Which of these teams could drop below them? So let's start at the very beginning. Let's start with the hardest one. Is there anything that could sink the Celtics? Like, we're going to pick one weakness. Is there anything that could sink the Celtics this year?
I mean, I know you could say this for every team. You could say for Miami, but injuries. I mean, the injury past to Porzingis, I think, and I mean, even if he goes down, I guess their other issue is their big man depth, because I think Al Horford getting older, they just don't really have a lot of bodies behind him, but they do have just so much firepower at the top of the roster that it feels like in the regular season they could probably get away with kind of still winning games without it. But it is the injury thing. I think it's just the bigs in that room. And it's about kind of, I guess, how do you run it back after kind of the mindset after a championship season? And I think it's easier to do it when everybody like doubts you from your previous championship. And when I say that, I mean that everybody's kind of talking about there being the easiest run to a finals and everything like that. So I don't think they have the mindset that it's like, okay, they got their championship and they're done. Like, I think they're still going to perform at a high level in the regular season. But just looking at their big man room, it's Porzingis. So if he goes down, they still have Tillman, they still have Cornette, and like I said, Horford is getting older. How old is he now? He's 38.
Yeah,
is it
38?
Which so like there's going to be some somebody that's going to need to step up there if Porzingis is kind of in and out of the roster, and that's why I guess the one difference, and I know not comparing Miami's roster, but it is important that you get depth at every position, like picking up Nasir Little. Like drafting a Khalil Ware behind guys like Kevin Love. Like, I think there is an importance there because you kind of in this day and age have to expect injuries. You have to expect guys being out for decent periods of time, weeks on end. So that's kind of, I guess, the one knock on them. But obviously, this isn't a team they're picking off. Like, this team is too talented. They're going to be at the top of the East.
All right, so we'll do percentages here. We'll do this just for fun. I'm going to say 3% just because that one rings a bell for Heat fans. 3% chance that the Heat could finish ahead of Boston this season. So you guys can all print up T-shirts if that ends up coming through. All right, number 2, the Knicks. I mean, I have one. Their center situation is concerning, and now it's that Mitchell Robinson is not going to be back till what, January? Now I remember last year, or December, January, and I remember last year that kept getting put off with him, and then he ends up coming back, and then Embiid takes out his legs. Which, if you want to rewatch that, by the way, like, I mean, I don't dislike Joel. I really don't. Like, I know we had some fun with him during the Olympics, but like, he does some things that are everything that they say Bam does, Joel does, right? Like, Knicks fans have, why is their issue not more with him? Like, Knicks fans have this issue with Bam, and Mitchell Robinson literally is going to miss part of the season, or a good chunk of the season, because of what Embiid did during the playoffs last year. Anyway. No Hartenstein, and you're reincorporating Randall. I guess this gives them a path to start Randall at the 5 to start the season, and then you can play all your wings because you could, I guess, Tibbs could then play. Well, you're going to play. You play Anunoby at the 4, Bridges at the 3, right? Hart and Brunson in the backcourt. And you just, although I think DiVincenzo should start, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think? How do you think they play? They have players. I'm not going to deny this. The Knicks have. We talk about wings, like they have more wings than anybody in the league.
Yeah.
But I do think that they're going to miss Hartenstein from a rebounding perspective. A lot of what they did was finishing possessions defensively last year and then just getting the rebound, giving the ball to Brunson, and then just letting him operate. If they struggle to rebound the ball on the defensive end, then I think that could hurt them this year.
I mean, that's always been their biggest strength. Like that's kind of what got them through is like the offensive rebounding, just the rebounding in general, kind of taking care of the ball. I agree. I think the front court depth is kind of the main thing. But I'll give you another one. Like I like their roster actually. Like I really do. I like the idea of having like a bunch of defensive wings. I like the idea of having kind of a scorer, obviously like Brunson. Like he's obviously tough to deal with. But I think there is going to be a grace period that they're going to have to figure out how to work together. Like, I don't think it's like, okay, they're friends. Like they played together in college and they're buddies and they're just going to like immediately work. Like, I think there could be a little bit of a grace period because what is Randall going to look back into this system? Because they obviously went on some runs without him. And there's question marks of like what's going to happen if he's trying to get 15 shots up. Like, there's going to be some things there. And does that mean guys like McHale are going to be playing a strict catch and shoot role? Does that mean like there's definitely some things there? And DiVincenzo's a guy that's played really well. Feels like he's a guy that you'd want getting a little bit more reps. It feels like he's somebody you'd want getting off the leash a little bit more. So there's some coaching things there that they're going to really have to figure out. Like I still think they're going to be a really good regular season team, just because they have the talent, they have the depth, they have everything like that. But it's not. I don't think it's going to be easy, like of just working together. Like there's definitely some question marks there of how it's going to work. And like you said, there's different starting lineup ways they can go. But the big man thing's interesting. Like that feels like something. They feel like a team that's going to be active at the trade deadline to me. They feel like a team that even if Mitchell Robinson does get healthy, it still feels like they're a big away from like really making that rotation work.
And there are going to be some bigs available. If you look around the league, there are some guys on expiring contracts that they could look at. One name that's come up a lot is Valanciunas. In Washington, he was kind of picked up to be traded. So there will be some big. I think Steven Adams is a guy who could still get moved. There are bigs around the league that they can't just play. I guess they could start Precious at the 5, I suppose. I mean, really, that's the last guy they have left. But the Randall thing is interesting, and the fit thing with that is interesting. He is a player who gets more in rhythm the more touches he gets, and I don't know with him and Brunson. Mikal Bridges kind of returning to the role he had with Phoenix. Hart doesn't need the ball necessarily. Anunoby can go without scoring, but they're also, you know this with Tibbs, he's only going to play 7. I mean, he's going to play him like 43 minutes a night. And he is going to drive them to a great regular season seed. I just wonder if they'll have anybody healthy by the playoffs. And if they're getting beat up on the boards a little bit, then that will be a problem if their guys have to size up. So that is a potential weakness. Now let's go to the percentage here. What is the percentage that not in the playoffs, because I still think the Heat could pick them off in the playoffs if they're right, if Jimmy's right. But in the regular season, what percentage would you put it at that they finish ahead of them?
I will go 13% for Bam's number.
Okay. Seems about right. 13%. All right. One more here before we go to the break. Philadelphia. Last year, just going through the numbers on them. Last year, 116 offensive rating, 113 defensive rating. So the defensive rating was 11th in the league. They just picked up Paul George. They retained Oubre. They brought in Eric Gordon as an additional shooter off the bench. And they still have, obviously, Maxey. And it seems like Embiid is coming to the season healthy. We'll see if that lasts. Tobias Harris is gone. They can stop blaming him for everything. What is the weakness there?
So I'm honestly looking at this roster, and part of me kind of feels like, well, number one, the injury concerns. Like I that's always going to be like Paul George and Joel Embiid come playoff time. Will they be healthy? And I know this is a regular season thing. the age of this roster, I guess, like this is a little bit of an older team as well. Like putting that around Joel Embiid, I wonder how that's going to work. But also, I'm still curious of like how this is going to work shooting wise, like spacing wise, because like guys like Paul George are going to have to be like really good catch and shoot wise on decent volume, which he can be. But just look at this, like if it's Maxey, who's obviously a good shooter, and you go to like if it's Kelly Oubre, Paul George, Caleb Martin, and Joel Embiid, like you're gonna have to have like those type of seasons that Caleb was having earlier in Miami with Miami to really make this work. And I just wonder how that's going to look shooting wise on the offensive end. But I think the one major weakness is like it probably isn't a regular season thing. It probably is just being healthy by April. That's really the thing for this team, and it'll always be the thing for this team. And I guess part of that is similar to Miami, but it's a little different because they haven't done it yet. They're still trying to prove it and get to a conference finals. So it's just that feels like the thing. But their bench, I guess I'm trying to think of like what their bench is even going to look like because they have Kyle. I think their bench is kind of the thing that's a lot older. Like they have Kyle. You mentioned Eric Gordon. They got some youth in they have Adam Bona that they picked up in the draft, but they also have Andre Drummond, I think, as their backup big. So like their bench is really old. So like if things start falling apart, it'll be taxing for these guys. It feels like in the regular season to have to step in. So their stars, their top three, just have to be their top three all the way through for them to be a high seed. But I think they'll be a decent regular season team. Like I really do. Like this, I know we're saying that with a lot of these teams because I think this is kind of the obvious thing. But this is another. I don't want to keep saying this in favor of Miami, but like this is always going to be one of those teams that you feel they could pick off in the playoffs. You just don't trust them.
You don't trust them, and we've obviously seen the result before. But a lot of things would have to break right. And I think when you look at their bench, it seems like Nurse will kind of nurse the bench, so to speak. That he will. It'll probably won't be big minutes for Lowry, big minutes for Drummond. I think the Caleb thing is interesting, and it's funny because I forgot to mention him at the beginning. Maybe I blocked the whole thing out, but it does seem duplication there with Oubre. So I'm curious to see how they work in both of them. I come down to this. I don't think that they're going to have an issue incorporating Paul George. I don't. He's smart enough at this age to kind of know where he fits and when he can take over and when he doesn't have to. He still has the ability to do it in spurts. I think some of it with Paul was the pressure that was put on him in certain situations to lead. I don't know that that's necessarily him. We saw it a little bit with Indiana. I think once he went to the Clippers, I think he kind of wanted to fade in behind Kawhi, but Kawhi was never really healthy consistently. So, and the two of them were never healthy consistently. So they never were able to cash in the way that they were supposed to when they traded SGA for him and along with 12,000 picks. I think he felt some of that pressure. I don't think he'll feel it here. I think he's going to be fine. It just comes back to one thing for me. Like Embiid's going to miss time. And the question is how are George and Maxey going to be able to carry them during that time that they stay up in the top three in the conference? But he's going to miss time. There's going to be something with him. There always is. And, even if Maxey ascends, we saw last year when Embiid went out, there wasn't enough with Maxey. Now he's got Paul George. So their chemistry is going to be really important there. I would say I would give the Heat, I don't know. What number should we come up with? 76 minus 100 minus 76. I'll say 24% chance to pick. Is that high? 24% chance to finish above them?
Maybe a little bit, but the injury thing, there's a chance there just because you don't know what the hell situation will look with Philly throughout the season. So I don't hate it. 24. That's a decent one.
All right, so we're going with 3%, 13%, and probably a little bit too high, 24%. Yeah. All right, on the other side, we'll start with the Bucks. Before we do, I mentioned a great sponsor, the 5 Reasons Sports Network. 100%. This is the place to go if you've got any problem with your wheels. You want to repair them, you want to restore them, you want to refinish them. U-Brake Wheel Fix. Over 20 years of experience and located in North Miami, U-Brake Wheel Fix offers quick repairs for damaged wheels, and in most cases can offer free loaner wheels to keep you on the road while repairing your damaged wheel. If your wheels are looking weathered and it's time to freshen up your car, don't replace, refinish. They got all the colors there. Their in-house wheel refinishing solutions such as powder coating, machining, and polishing will give your car the new look it deserves. I always suggest to people with U-Brake, and again, it's the letter U, U-Brake Wheel Fix. go to their Instagram page because you can see all the work that they do there, and something's going to catch your eye. Go to YouBreak, Wheel Fix, or contact our guy Mark and his staff at 305-748-0112. That's 305-748-0112. Mention 5 reasons, you get 5.5% off your next repair. Again, it's YouBreak.wheelfix.com. Again, 305-748-0112. All right, the Bucks. I mean, this one to me is pretty obvious, but let's go down a little bit. This is the one I think they can pick off. Defensive rating last year, 115. Okay, 19th in the league. Now they went through what 7,000 coaches. They ended up with Doc Rivers. I don't see how they got better defensively this offseason. I mean, they added DeLon, who we like, who I think would have been nice if the Heat had been able to re-sign him. I'd still like to get to the bottom of what happened there. But, I mean, they added Gary Trent Jr. That's not going to help them defensively. The front court, I mean, Brooks not getting younger. They've looked to possibly in fact, Brooks is a guy I think could end up on the Knicks by the end of the year. I mean, and Middleton is not an elite wing defender at this stage. You're putting everything on Giannis, and we know Dame doesn't defend. That's not going to get better with age. So their offensive potential is there. It's obvious. If Giannis and Dame are healthy, they can make the thing work better together. I expect, but it hasn't just been Dame that's missed time lately. It's been Giannis who's missed time. These things are starting to accumulate a little bit. They've put a lot of burden on his back, but I think they could really fall off this year because I just don't know if they're going to guard.
The difference is like looking at, because we talk about like comparing them to Miami. The difference is like they have no depth. Like they really don't. And their depth that they do have is much older. Like you're talking about a 34-year-old Damian Lillard, a 33-year-old Chris Middleton, a 36-year-old Brook Lopez. You can keep going down the line. There's like, I actually like the Gary Trent pickup just because I know Middleton's going to miss time. And I think he actually, defensively, you're right. Like he's not going to cover any ground for Dame. But I did think they needed a little bit more shooting and just kind of getting a 2-guard that could slide in for Middleton when he is out. Like I thought was kind of important. DeLon Wright, surprisingly enough, like as much as we talk about, him not staying with Miami, like I think he's actually have a pretty decent role with Milwaukee. Like it's kind of like
that might be why he left, Brady. That honestly, that might be the reason.
He's going to be playing a decent role to kind of. They probably will play him with Dame. Like they'll probably have him covering a lot on the defensive end, and yeah, I think their biggest weakness would definitely be aging. Their depth is kind of an issue, and obviously defensively is kind of the other thing. I think, it's a lot on Giannis. It's like because he's won a championship. He knows what it takes kind of over the course of a season now. And he's like, does he want to put it all out there in the regular season as taxing as it is like he used to, knowing what it's going to take now in the playoffs with this version of this roster? So I actually agree. Like they could be a team actually. I don't think they're playing range. Like I don't know if they're in that range, but I do think they're going to lose probably some extra games. Like they could be a team, you're right, that does fall back a little bit. And it's funny because these next teams we're going to talk about, they're kind of the opposite. So it's kind of like which teams do you trust more? Like the improving young teams or the aging kind of older teams that are kind of, getting out of their bracket a little bit. It's kind of the question of like which teams do you trust? And it feels like in regular season time, at least, you're going to lean with the youth.
So I kind of feel like the percentage should be higher on this one. But in honor of Doc Rivers, since he's always blowing 3-1 leads, I'll say 31%. Would you go over that or under?
That's about right. Highest maybe 35%.
Okay.
If anything, like just to kind of space this out a little bit because we are getting closer to their range.
Right.
But yeah, I'd say 31 to 35.
All right, let's go to the Cavs. Did they change anything? Isn't the roster like the same? It feels like it, right? They ended up re-signing Okoro after all. So, well, let me look at their numbers from last year. They were 7th in the league in defensive rating last year. Offensive rating 16th. Re-signed Mitchell, re-signed Okoro, didn't trade Allen, still have Mobley, didn't trade Garland. Still have Strus. So their top 6 is the same. They changed their coach, Bickerstaff is now with Detroit, and they have Kenny Atkinson, who I think got a raw deal with the Nets. I think he's a good coach. So but what would be the Achilles heel here? Because it's virtually the same team. It seems like they have the same issue, which is that Garland and Mitchell. I know. Tell me if you've heard this before. Their backcourt may not necessarily be additive to each other, right? I know another team that might be the case with. And in this case, their front court, it feels like Allen does like all the things you kind of want a guy to do, but Mobley's the guy they really want to break out. And it does not seem like that happens consistently. And I don't know that it's going to happen until Allen is gone. And then again, you have Strus, who they were kind of, they were a little disappointed in Max for some of the regular season inconsistency last year, which again we saw with Miami, but I think they liked him generally in terms of what he plugged in as a player and some of the moments that he had. And then again, they re-signed Okoro, who has been okay for a top 10 pick, but he hasn't been. He's his high end is kind of a good 3-and-D wing. What's the weakness here?
So I like their defensive system. Like I gives them a little bit of an extra punch in the regular season compared to some of these other teams. But I'll say I think their biggest weakness is the fact that you hit on it. Like their roster is the same. So I feel like their ceiling is so capped off at this point, but I think their floor is kind of capped off too. Like I don't think they're going to be much worse than what we've seen them be, but they're just not going to be much better than what we've seen them be. So I guess if that's kind of the clear weakness to me is like the Heat. We're talking about them like we're all over the map with them. Like we don't know where they're going to land. Cleveland, I think everybody knows where they're going to be. They're going to be right in the middle of the pack, and in playoffs, we know where it's going to end up being. I guess like they added Max for shooting, so it's a whole lot on him. But I think they just need some more shooting in the front court. Like they need more. They just need ability to space for some of these guys. If you're talking about guys like Garland and Mitchell working, like it can't just be all in your guards and wings to space. Like Mobley and Allen works defensively, but I just think they need somebody to plug in there, and kind of in that 4 spot, I guess, to kind of just be kind of a like. Is it crazy to me to say that Kevin Love would fit well in this team?
No, he would, because they tried to replace him essentially with Dean
Mm-hmm.
Wade, who was getting a lot of those minutes. But yes, Kevin Love from 3 years ago would be a good fit for this team. I mean, even off the bench, he probably wouldn't. They acted too hastily on that. But again, I know Kevin was frustrated with direction and kind of his lack of playing time when he came back from an injury. I'm going to say, well, I guess in honor of Max's number, I'll say 31% also. Does that seem about right?
Yeah,
I think
that's
it could
why
be higher, though.
That's why I had the Bucks hired percentage wise, just because I feel like I keep saying, like I think Cleveland is where they are. Like they're just going to be just mediocre, and they're just they're gonna be the same team that they were last year in the regular season. Like there's no fit acquisitions they're working in. Like they're just gonna be who they are. So I think there's an easier chance of them picking off Milwaukee for those other reasons than them picking off this team that's virtually the same.
All right, so let's go to the Magic then. And the big strength with the Magic, we know it at this point, third in the league in defensive rating, behind Minnesota and Boston. They struggled at times to score last year. They struggled in the playoffs to score last year. Franz Wagner in particular struggled. They gave him the extension. Paolo, you would think he takes another step this year, but they added KCP. So they're going to be even better defensively. Like this has the potential to be the best defensive team in the league. But is their weakness still getting consistent offense? And what would you give the Heat's chance? Because it feels to me like we can simplify this season. Like I know nobody talks about divisions anymore. If the Heat finish ahead of Orlando, they're probably going to be a playoff team, not a play-in team. Because I'm going to tell you something about the next team we're going to talk about. I think is going to slip.
I agree.
If they finish ahead of Orlando, I think they're a playoff team. I mean that's pretty much it. Win the division. I mean the rest of the division sucks. I mean it's Washington, Charlotte, and who was the third? And Atlanta, right? And the Heat will finish ahead of all 3 of those teams. So just finish ahead of the Magic. So what are the chances that they do that, and how would that have to happen?
I'm going to work these 2 teams in together. I know you were saying next, but Orlando and Indiana are kind of on 2 opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their play style. And I will always lean in the regular season in the version of Orlando defensively, just because it's just an easier thing to replicate than what Indiana did. Like speaking of taxing, like that is a taxing thing, a style of play. Their defense is absolutely not where you want it to be. They play such a fast style, and look, they could be a really good offense still, but it'd have to be at that same level that they were at last year. And we've seen teams like this tail off. Like it's kind of like the Atlanta of a few years ago. I know that's kind of the comparison they get. But that feels like to me the team that could slip because, as you said, I like the KCP pickup for Orlando. Uh, I'm still, I think they could be a team that kind of, I don't know if they improve. Like I think they're kind of sit where they were last year. They could kind of basically replicate what they did, but I don't know if the KCP signing. I like the shooting aspect. I like the defensive aspect. But Indiana's the team for me. Like if they could find a way that Indiana kind of plays this style where they kind of get ahead of themselves a little bit, where the shooting isn't at where it was last year, where the speed and efficiency is kind of the key word there because they were just so efficient with their offense and the speed they were playing at that's the team for me. So you said if they're higher than Orlando, if they're higher than Indiana to me, like that's kind of where they can kind of be measured at. Like if they just have to be here's the other thing I'll say because this is always going to be the case with Miami. We talked about them winning like the big games last year, like against good teams. Indiana just wiped the floor with a lot of the games that they should win, and they got themselves in a position. Like if, if Miami could do that, no matter who's on the roster, like who's playing on a certain night, they just have to win the games that they're supposed to win, and that's a hard thing to say. Like I know there was some things going around where Wade's getting his stat sheet on the night. I think they're playing Detroit, and everybody's like, "We know how that game's going to go." Like that that's a 3-point loss with a missing 3-pointer.
Well, I almost feel like they did that night, not because it was a homecoming game necessarily, but because that everyone will get up for that game, whereas they wouldn't otherwise. But the Heat are not talented enough to take anybody for granted this year. They have to clean up on those games. Indiana's second in the league in offensive rating last year, and a lot of that occurred even before they got Siakam, who they started to incorporate as the season went on. They also got playoff experience last year. So all of this points to them being better, and I think they're going to be worse. I think it's a place. You know what I think it is, and I hate to say it, and I'm sorry, Dolphins fans. We're doing this in minute 32. I think sometimes this offensive stuff gets figured out at a certain point, and I think that teams, the Pacers were tough to prepare for last year, because again during a regular season you don't see their style very often. So like you're coming in to see them in a back to back. Like we'll get a very good taste of it early in the season. The Heat have 2 games. Now they're not back to backs; they're spread out by day, but they have 2 games on the back end of a 6-game road trip in Indiana, and we'll get a sense. Like, did he feel like running this year? Does Jimmy feel like playing both? Is Tyler healthy for both? Like we'll know. That's games 10 and 11, I think. So we'll get a sense of it. But I do think that teams are going to figure out how to play them. Whereas last year it was like, okay, I mean, if you're playing a slog against the Knicks and then your next game is Indiana, like you don't want to run with them. But I do think people will have a better plan. I also think specifically teams figured out Halliburton a little last year. They started to take away some things from him and not allow him to get into rhythm. His injuries hurt him, obviously, but I think it was more than that. And I know they can lean into Nemhard and they've got some other guards, etc. But I think that worked out. That'll work out differently. Anyway, thanks for joining us on 5 on the Floor.